Welcome. This module will highlight key areas of the R2v3 code of practices that are facility related. While the intention of this training module is to increase understanding, it's not intended to be used as a standalone guide. To download the complete code of practices, please visit the document library on the CERI website. The guiding document for the R2 certification program is the Code of Practices, which has been developed to ensure that certification bodies and accreditation bodies follow the same set of guidelines to implement R2 certification. This training module highlights key areas of the R2v3 Code of Practices that are of particular importance to R2 facilities. Most R2 certifications are for a facility with one location owned by a single entity. Some organizations, however, do not fit this description. The R2 Code of Practices provides some alternative certification structures to accommodate different ownership and organizational structures. Campus facilities is for an organization owned by a single entity that has multiple locations that work together with coordinated operations under a central management system. One location will be the primary controlling location, with all other locations fulfilling unique operations to meet the single scope. Operations are interconnected and jointly process common equipment. Each facility in the campus will be audited each year. Under the new Code of Practices, multi-sites are no longer identified under the certification structures. Shared facilities applies to different companies operating recycling operations independently within the same location. Each company will be independently audited and certified. Common parent facilities applies to multiple legal entities, each wholly owned by the same parent company. All the legal entities operate under the same management system, and therefore one audit covers all activities and scope of operations. The CB will issue one certificate that lists each of the legal entities. Multiple certificates will not be issued. Group is specific to multiple companies owned by different entities operating together to fulfill the activities of one single scope. The organizations can be at one location or multiple locations. In this structure, all companies must operate under the same management system. All locations will be audited during each audit cycle. The CB will issue one group certificate that lists each of the certified entities, and multiple certificates will not be issued. During the contract review phase, the certification body will work with the facility to determine which structure best fits the organization. The certification structure will be identified on the R2 certificate. The scope statement specifies the R2 process requirements and material types that have been audited and certified at the location listed on the R2 certificate. The purpose of the scope statement is to provide transparency about the capabilities of each R2 certified facility. Activities included in the scope must be demonstrated with audit evidence for each of the associated processes and materials. Keep in mind, activities that have not yet been implemented by a facility cannot be audited and certified. And any R2-related activities that are being controlled or carried out by a facility cannot be excluded from the audit. For each process or activity listed in the scope, the facility must have records and other required audit evidence that will demonstrate each process performed by the facility is done so in accordance with R2 requirements. The Code of Practices requires that specific terminology is used when defining a facility's scope statement. The required words are based on the specific process requirements or appendices that apply to a facility's operation. This is intended to provide more consistent and transparent descriptions about the capabilities of each facility. The appendices each have a designated word or phrase to describe a specific R2 process or activity. These terms should only be included in the scope if the R2 facility performs the associated processes. In addition to the processes and activities being performed, the scope statement must include the specific types of equipment, components, and materials that are controlled by the R2 facility. Let's look at a few examples of scope statements. The first example is collection, logical data sanitization, test and repair of used cell phones. Collection indicates that the R2 facility has Appendix A and ships cell phones or components to downstream vendors. Logical data sanitization indicates that the R2 facility performs logical data sanitization in accordance with the requirements in Appendix B, data sanitization. Test and repair indicates that the R2 facility tests and repairs used cell phones in accordance with the requirements in Appendix C, Test and Repair. It's important that only activities performed by the R2 facility are listed in the scope. Activities carried out by downstream vendors should not be included. In this example, the scope statement is materials recovery of lithium-ion batteries from used electronic equipment and components. In this case, the scope indicates that the R2 facility is the final processor of lithium-ion batteries into its raw material components and operates in accordance with the requirements in Appendix E, Materials Recovery. It's important to note that as a final processor, there are no downstream vendors at this facility. Evidence would have to demonstrate that no focus materials were being shipped to downstream vendors. The outputs at this facility would be raw material streams of non-focus materials. The scope statement of this example is materials recovery and physical data destruction of used electronic equipment, logical sanitization, test and repair of cell phones. In this scenario, materials recovery without collection indicates that the facility has been certified to Appendix E, Materials Recovery, and is the final disposition for the used electronic equipment. Materials recovery can include a variety of activities such as destructive dismantling, possibly shredding, or other materials recovery operations. Physical data destruction under Appendix B would be for all used electronic equipment. It's important to know that once an R2 facility has been certified to Appendix B, all equipment that undergoes physical or logical sanitization must be carried out following the requirements established in Appendix B. For cell phones only, this scope statement indicates that the R2 facility performs physical and logical sanitization of cell phones under Appendix B and test and repair operations under Appendix C. For more information on this topic, refer to the Scope section in the R2v3 Code of Practices. Sometimes changes will occur at a facility that require a change in the facility's scope. For example, changes in processes or activities undertaken at a facility, or changes in the materials managed, operational expansions, mergers, or any other change in an R2 facility's operation. It's important to notify the CB as soon as a future scope change is foreseen. Depending on the nature of the scope change, the CB will determine how much on-site or remote audit time is required to verify the implementation of the scope change at the R2 facility. Any NCs issued during the scope change audit must be verified and closed by the CB prior to issuing the certificate with the new scope. The amount of time required to conduct an R2 audit directly correlates to the facility's scope, the number of facility employees, and the additional process requirements or appendices that are being certified at the facility. Calculating audit time begins with Table 4 in the Code of Practices, which specifies the amount of audit time to be allocated to the core requirements. Additional audit time is assigned for each process requirement that is being audited. These calculations are found in Tables 5A, B, and C of the Code of Practices. Where nonconformities are identified through an R2 audit, additional audit time may be required to review and verify the effectiveness of any corrective actions. More information on this topic can be found in the Calculating Audit Time section of the R2v3 Code of Practices. Good audit preparation is essential. All required records and evidence must be available during every audit. It's also essential that the auditor be able to observe live operations to verify that R2 requirements are being implemented. During certification and recertification audits, the auditor will be required to ensure all activities are operational and will review associated audit evidence. The auditor will also review a complete cycle of internal audits and compliance audits. Any nonconformities from an internal audit that are still open at the time of the certification audit will be written as a nonconformity by the certification body auditor. It's important for facilities to conduct their internal audits in a timely manner, with enough time to close NCs before the certification body audit. This will avoid having additional audit time assigned to close nonconformities at the certification body level. During the surveillance audits, the auditor will have more flexibility to choose what core requirements will be audited. The following core requirements are audited during every annual surveillance audit. Core Requirement 1, Scope, Core Requirement 5, Tracking Throughput, Core Requirement 7, Data Security, and Core Requirement 8, Focus materials. All applicable process requirements must be audited during every audit of the certification cycle. Out of each 3-year certification cycle, one surveillance audit may be conducted remotely. The decision to conduct a remote audit is at the sole discretion of the certification body. To be eligible, the facility must meet certain criteria as required in the Code of Practices, including appropriate video communication technology and electronically accessible documents. Another important aspect of audit preparation is ensuring the auditor has access to documents and records. This is especially important in the case of remote audits, where many documents are required to be uploaded prior to the audit. Auditors are required to take copies of certain documents and records to be included as evidence in the audit report. Those documents are in Table 7 of the Code of Practices. Some of the documents listed are the FM Management Plan and Closure Plan. This is Table 7 of the Code of Practices, which specifies key documents that the auditor must include with their audit report, including the Data Sanitization Plan and the R2 Reuse Plan. The Code of Practices also includes corrective action requirements. An auditor's job is to assess a facility's conformance to the R2 standard. In areas where the facility is unable to demonstrate evidence of meeting an R2 requirement, the auditor will record a nonconformity. Nonconformities are an excellent tool for identifying areas that require improvement, with the end goal that the facility implements best management practices for its recycling operations and conforms to R2 requirements. For R2v3, nonconformities are now recorded at every audit, including Stage 1. There are 2 levels of nonconformities, major and minor. Generally, the designation of a minor versus a major is based on the seriousness of the issue and the nature of the missing evidence. The Code of Practices requires that certain deficiencies be considered as major nonconformities. For instance, failure to identify a focus material stream in the FM Management Plan, or failure to identify a downstream vendor in a downstream recycling chain flowchart, or due diligence not performed effectively for shipments of controlled streams, or failure to maintain a valid SERI licensing agreement. The certification body will assign additional follow-up audit time for each nonconformity. This allows time for the CB to verify that corrective actions have been taken and that the nonconformity has been closed. Timeframes for closing NCs are defined in the Code of Practices. A certification body may have more stringent time requirements for the closure of NCs. The CB is required to define the time necessary to review NCs and their corrective actions to ensure closure. All NCs must be closed prior to the issuance of an R2 certificate. Stage 1 NCs require submission of corrections and not corrective actions prior to the Stage 2 audit. The CB may determine whether additional audit time is required to review corrections. For more information on this topic, see the section titled Classification and Closure of NCs in the Code of Practices. The CB may conduct additional special audits at their discretion. Special audits to be conducted for reasons such as verifying changes in the R2 facility's operations and scope, investigating complaints or allegations, closure of NCs, or resolution of suspension issues. The Code of Practices specifies the process that certification bodies must follow to verify and audit the move of an R2 facility from one location to another. It's important to notify your CB before the move takes place. The CB is required to audit the new location prior to completion of the move. The new location must be operational and have completed its internal R2 audit, compliance audit, and any other applicable audits. If the new facility location cannot be audited prior to completing the move, the CB will suspend the certificate for the facility's original location. If the audit and issuance of the certificate for the new facility is not completed within 6 months of the move, the CB will withdraw the R2 certificate for the previous location. This means the facility would need a new Stage 1 and Stage 2 audit of the new location if it decides to reapply for certification. If an R2 facility chooses to change its certification body, good communication is crucial to avoid a possible lapse in certification. To ensure a smooth and timely transfer, the facility should inform SERI and the former CB of the intended change. SERI monitors and works to improve the R2 certification program through activities such as audit package reviews that evaluate the quality of evidence included in the audit report used to demonstrate the facility's implementation of R2 requirements. Any areas of concern are used to identify topics for additional R2 auditor training or knowledge-based resources. Spot inspections of R2 facilities conducted by SERI or a SERI representative are assessments that are part of SERI's quality control program and not always in response to a complaint or concern. Any issues resulting from these audits are communicated to the facility's certification body. Witness audits are announced assessments conducted by SERI or a SERI representative in conjunction with a planned certification body audit of an R2 facility. The SERI assessor evaluates the audit team's understanding of the R2 standard as well as the facility's application of the standard. For more detailed information on the Code of Practices, download the full version from the R2 document library on the SERI website.